on that topic, I think what we're missing at the moment is probably the root cellars would be very beneficial to have that, as Laurie pointed out earlier, to have that resource for when the food production meets a certain level. They're going to have to put all that food somewhere if the farmers can't build it themselves on the farm. And that's quite often a constraint on some farms. We've personally built one in our basement for potato storage because we have a ground level basement, and we store it there in the winter. But the bigger issue, and I don't come at this from an animal producer perspective, I come at it from a vegetable producer's perspective, is that without an abattoir up here, a lot of people are having a very, very hard time looking at animal production for eggs or meat, and sorry, not abattoir for eggs, but abattoir for meat, and launching a business that can thrive, because currently I know a number of people who haul their animals to Telkwa, and that geographically works out to over 2 hours driving time from here, especially if you're hauling a lot of animals and the trailer's heavy. And that is, there's not a lot of room to make money, even if you live right beside an abattoir in animal production. So that is a barrier they face, and I don't know what it would take to bring an abattoir here. I'm not sure what happened along the way, why we ended up at this place today where we don't have one, but the benefit of having an abattoir in the area and having animal enterprises thriving is that what comes out the back end of an animal and the bedding that they lie on and live on becomes an input for people who are trying to build their soil, which is not just vegetable producers. All good farmers are trying to build their soil. And we could really use what can be purchased off these animal producers if they will sell their compost and their manure after. Our gardens would benefit from it greatly, especially if the compost was prepared professionally and the weed seeds were killed because it was turned properly and it was watered regularly and people had the equipment to do that. It just shows the interrelation that we all have in our society. We can't do anything in isolation. We depend on other people. All farmers do. And that's kind of one of the beauties of farming, really, is it brings people together because we have these dependencies.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kevin. Does anyone else on the panel want to speak to that question? Laurie.
I'm just going to use that one. So my partner Bill couldn't be here because it's lambing season, so one of us has to be at home just in case the moms need some extra help or the babies need some extra help wiping their bums. So we thought about this, and I'm really a big fan of having a shared facility for processing. The abattoir is a really interesting question. For those of you who are familiar with the work of Joe Salatin, he wrote this really interesting book called Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. And, you know, that's kind of how I feel. And there's things I want to tell you, but I probably won't because this is all being recorded. But yeah, the abattoir is a really interesting idea. So Joel Salatin's approach to things is to find like the loopholes. So he's a farmer in the States, and you know, without having a proper abattoir where you have your inspected meat products that you're legally allowed to sell, he is not legally selling meat to any people. Instead, what he does is So that's like really interesting. And I think like the absence of an abattoir puts a lot of producers in the situation of having to be like illegal and, you know, kind of being treated as criminals, which is kind of silly. You know, so I'm with you. I've heard a lot of people saying that an abattoir for terrace is really needed and it's a real missed opportunity. And the whole question of, you know, the other outputs from a farm that does produce animals, the manure and the soil building is really a big deal. That was one of the reasons that we got into sheep, because we're growing hops, and hops are a pretty heavy feeder. So we actually graze our sheep in the hop yard. So that's like a whole nother topic, but I mean, it's really quite scientific, and you can only put them in at certain times and things like that. But so they're in there and they're pruning and they're fertilizing our hop plants at the same time. So, so the other thought that Bill wanted me to pass on to you about the processing facilities, though, he thinks that it would be a good idea to have a mobile processing facility, one that's actually on wheels that could travel to different farms instead of having it like in one location in a community. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I've seen lots of examples of mobile facilities and also permanent facilities too. And so that's something that I would, you know, I'm going to put on my wish list, and evaluating, you know, when does it make sense to have a mobile one? Like, for example, for juicing fruit, like that would be a good example of a mobile facility. Whereas like an abattoir, I guess that might have to be more permanent too. Yeah, so in terms of efficiency, I think that both models would have to be looked at.
Is the Class D or E slaughter license insufficient? Like, is there some limitation there that doesn't make it practical to be processing your own meat?
Absolutely. So for animal producers, when they purchase their land and they've spent the money purchasing their livestock and set up their buildings and set up their fences, and if they're doing, say, chickens and they're doing more than 200 chickens, they've also purchased quota, so you're putting more money on the table. If it was economically viable, Cam, you would see one here in Terrace right now, and we don't have one. There's people talking about it, and I'm sure they will come, but it's going to come out of someone's back pocket who may or may not be able to afford it. Yeah, that's how I see a Class D license coming here, and I really hope they can afford it if they do it and pay for itself.
Yeah, there are licenses in Terrace, though, aren't there, for Class D farm license and several others. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 6 months paperwork, but it's I get inspection now. I can sell anywhere within the regional district.
Right.
For retail.
Yeah. So it started up, and yeah. So historically speaking here, we haven't had anyone able to, especially approach farming as a full-time career as animal producers. So if this is going to lead to a full-time job, I really thank you for setting that up and incurring the costs and making that available to our community, because it's
Yeah, there's quotas under your license. You're allowed up to 25 animal units. There's certain quotas you're allowed to process. When you get to a bigger number, you have to be an abattoir.
so
I can, under the license, you can process other people's animals, and they can sell them within the regional district. We can't butcher, we can slaughter, and half the animal. We can sell halves, quarters, or the whole animal. We can't.
you can't sell cut and wrap meat then.
Can't cut and wrap. So the way it's done
Yeah.
is we slaughter it, take it to the meat market or butcher your choice. The client pays the cut and wrap of 75 cents a pound or whatever, and they can do with it what they want. They can sell it anywhere within the regional district of MSP. That's where our Class C license is located within. And there's no cost to get your Class C license. It's just a lot of government paperwork, and the health inspector comes and inspects the process and make sure you cool the animal down quick enough and
Yeah, it's also an economics and a business planning question. I mean, if you want to raise animals, you don't necessarily want to be a butcher. So if you want to go through the hassle of having a facility that you can slaughter your animals in and you want to sell it directly to customers, that's great. But if you just want to raise a lot of animals and ship them off to an abattoir and then you can be done with it, that's a perfectly viable business model. If there's an abattoir you can take them to. So.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt that one there. And thank you so much for adding that into the discussion. So we'll move on to the next question, which is going to Cam. And that is, what barriers do you feel need to be addressed to develop a strong regional food system that is supported by residents? Who do you see as the key stakeholders to making this happen?
Yeah, okay. To establish a regional food system, there's a lot of different ways that people access food. I think starting with the farmers market is a great starting point. You create those personal interactions between your producers and your consumers. That's where my business is going to be focusing this year. As business expands and you try to get into wholesale channels, you can access a lot more consumers. And I think that it's really important to have players from both sides of the table talking about the needs and the limitations there as well. I would love to be selling my vegetables in Save-On and Safeway at some point, but I recognize that they have limitations. And so I'm not just going to knock on their door and tell them they should be buying my produce without listening to their requirements, because they have those rules for a reason. So it's really important to respect where the bigger players in the food system are coming from. There's also institutional purchasers, such as schools, hospitals, prisons, airports, and then there's mining camps and other large producers or purchasers and consumers like that, which can be really good markets to get into if you can hit that economy of scale. And the scale that I'm farming at for the first couple of years anyways is not nearly at the point where I can benefit from something like LNG coming to town. There's going to be these huge work camps, and I would love to be able to sell them hundreds of pounds of salad mix, but I'm going to need to invest in a lot of tractor equipment before I can make that profitable. So I am planning to grow over time, and I would love to be able to get to that scale. And if everything goes well at Hidden Acres Farm, which so far it is, there's a lot of land there that I can be using for growing vegetables. But you have to invest in that equipment wisely, and you can't get there overnight. So hopefully by growing smart and growing at the right speed. I don't want to say growing slowly, because I would really like to ramp up to a point where I'm able to pay myself more than minimum wage, and that's going to take a few years at least. But I am planning to do this full time, and so yeah, creating those connections with the purchasers is going to be key. Getting to know the community is going to be key, and getting to know the farming community around here as well, because there's a lot of people that have a lot more experience than I do that I can be learning really good things from. I haven't farmed in the Northwest very much, if at all, so there's definitely some regionally specific variables that I'm going to be learning a lot about in the next couple of years here. And then of course there's government and regulations. Similar to the wholesale market, they have rules for a reason, and you have to respect that. I think it's great that people find loopholes and people find ways to work around some of the regulations, and that can contribute to kind of community food security and like feeding your neighbors, feeding your family and friends. If you want to grow a business to the point that you can hire employees and pay yourself year round, I don't think you can be selling milk to cats and selling meat to dogs. I don't think that you're gonna raise a family, pay your dentist. Like there's just basics that you need to cover as a person. A good friend of mine jokes that I should be looking for a wife with benefits, because as a farmer, I'm not going to be making a lot of money to cover that kind of stuff. And it's a funny joke, but I hope he's wrong. I hope I can make enough money to cover that kind of stuff myself. And he's in the room right now. But anyways, yeah, you gotta approach it professionally, and yeah, government like Ministry of Agriculture, Northern Health, and those inspection agencies, they're here in our best interest, and you have to trust that the staff are trying to do the right thing. That being said, you're going to disagree with them. So, I liked the comment earlier about moving at the speed of trust. And if you can get to know some of the people that work in some of those regulatory agencies, then you can understand, where the rules are, where you can bend them, and where you have to advocate for change. And so hopefully through some of those partnerships, we can make a better impact on our regional food system here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cam. Do any of the other panelists want to speak to that?
Okay, this is something I've been thinking about in terms of barriers and just sort of elaborating on the idea of what the sales channels are. And if you want to sell directly to institutions, you know, when I was in waste management, one of the big tools that we always advocated for was purchasing policies, like please buy post-consumer content recycled paper, right? And it's the same thing if you want to support your local food system, please buy local food. So if you're an institution, if you're a municipality or you're a band office, anyone that has big events like this all the time, if you can specify, you know, local content on the menu, that would be really helpful. But so yeah, having the market, because like when we went into hops, like that was sort of our big concern, because some farm products have huge upfront investments. Hops is one of them. So we didn't want to invest in all that infrastructure without knowing if someone was actually going to buy our product first. So yeah, that is one of the barriers, is just like that uncertainty and the high level of risk, because there are like high upfront capital costs. So like the CSA model is really great, like in theory, but I think like a lot of the new businesses, like breweries, for example, they're so busy getting their own business going up that they're not really thinking about their supply chain. Like even though like I did this really amazing market survey 4 years ago before we planted our hops, everybody was like, oh yeah, awesome, we want to buy local hops and make local beer with local hops. But it hasn't really happened, you know, and I think it's because they're really busy running their business, and I think it's going to be, you know, maybe at least another year when the breweries kind of understand their business and they're in steady state. I mean, that's a very tricky business. It's all recipe based. All the equipment is designed around pellets, whereas as a small scale organic producer, we're not making pellets. So that's a big barrier. Again, it gets the processing facility. You know, so like for us, we did a feasibility study about it, and you need about 20 acres of hops in order to justify like the pelletizing equipment that you would need. So that's kind of where we're at. It's like, well, I don't want to be a hops factory. That's not why I got into farming. I love having a diverse farm. What I would like to see is us being more of a nursery, and if anyone else is interested in growing hops, we can supply you with acclimatized hop plants now, because we've been growing them for 4 years. So yeah, those are a couple of the barriers that I've been thinking about, is just like educating the market more and maybe getting more information out there about community supported agriculture, and maybe just even more education for farmers, you know, giving us, and I know there is a workshop coming up about this, but some tools in our toolbox for like how do we get our customers in a really efficient way. One of the things that Bill and I have learned, even for gate sales, so we have like a $20 minimum transaction. Because that's a big deal. People love to talk about your farm, and that's great, but that all takes up our time. So, you know, and our time is valuable. So if you're going to be on our farm, like, please spend some money and support us. And that's why I think people don't really understand that. That's why we wanted to have a farmers panel. It takes a lot of time, it's a lot of manual labor involved with farming, and just talking to people because they think it's interesting. Like, that's nice, but it's not paying our bills.
Awesome, thanks, Laurie. Anything else from the panel on that topic? You don't have to.
No.
Okay.
I'll say one.
One more comment, I guess, would just be around entrepreneurial skills. And Laurie, I love your hops. I love homebrewing. I love using your hops. But if that's not what the market is buying, then that's when a business has to pivot sometimes. I'm not going to tell you how to run your business, but you know, if I go to the farmer's market and I have dirty beets and nobody's buying them, well, maybe I should wash those beets. Or, you know, if I bring salad mix and a grocery store can't sell it because I haven't triple washed it, well, maybe I should be looking at investing in the triple washing facility. And so, you know, it's similar to having an abattoir. And doing all these needs assessments, it's really great to understand what you need and to try and advocate for bringing those things here. But ultimately, you just need people that want to do it. Like, we can spend all day saying we need an abattoir, but until a meat cutter with a passion for starting a business in the Northwest shows up and says, hey, I'm going to do this, we're not really going anywhere. And so I'm hoping that people like myself that are interested in spending every hour of their day on the farm are going to show up and try to run profitable businesses that are making smart business decisions here. So yeah, I think that that's really important to having a viable food system in the area as well.
Thanks, Cam. So our next question is going to go to Laurie to begin with. So the question is, with 40% of BC farms being considered small scale, many producers face the challenge of not being able to farm full-time and or make a living wage. What are some strategies that can make small farms more profitable, and how can these be achieved here in the Northwest?
Okay, thanks, Margot. And I did choose this question, so... So for those of you who know us, you know that over the last few years, we've been doing lots of different things like music events and workshops, basically agritourism. So like we knew as a small scale hop producer and working with perennials, like that is our specialty. We just love perennial plants. We don't have to plant year after year. But as with all perennial plants, like it takes 3 or 4 years for them to get to the yield that makes any sense. So when I was doing my business plan, like I had a lot of other products and services that we were going to sell until we had a lot of hops available to sell. We're only in year 4 now, so things are just getting started. So yeah, that's what I would recommend, is just to kind of be realistic and ramp up. I think we're probably only at about like 30% of our household income is actually produced on the farm. But the strategies, other strategies that we use too, is we just sell everything that we can. And we try and put as much time as we can into actually selling something, as opposed to other activities that don't actually produce any money. I mean, it's really nice if all your fences are painted and you've got pretty flowers everywhere, but that's not making you any money. So we don't paint our fences and we don't have flowers everywhere. But what we do have, we sell sheepskins now, and Bill's been making beautiful buttons from the horns, and we have hooves that we clean up, and they're available for regalia. And we've been working with some of our friends in the Hazeltons that are artists, and they just really like the stuff that we have. Actually, a lot of artists end up buying our products, which is really interesting. So yeah, that's a strategy that I would recommend, is just being really creative. There's a lot more products from one plant than sometimes you realize. Like with the hops, everyone thinks about brewing right away, but for us there's actually 4 different products from there. So one is for brewing the beer, but another one is actually in the spring when they're shooting up. Those are edible, right? And every piece of rhizome, that's a piece of root, that's what it's called. You get about 8 shoots from it, but you're only going to train 3 or 4 of them. So you have 4 extra shoots available from every plant. And we have 1,000 plants in 1 acre. So we can harvest those shoots, and that's an edible product. It's like hops asparagus is basically what it's called. So just like doing your homework and really knowing your plant and what all the products are from it is a good strategy. And then we also are selling rootstock. So that ended up being another product. It isn't just hops. It's actually giving people what they need to start their own plant and their own hop yard. Another product from hops that you might not be aware of is they have medicinal properties. So we've been making tinctures from them and medicinal teas combined with other plants. So a really nice strategy then too is to grow complementary plants for one thing that you have. So we started with hops, but now we're also growing skullcap and other herbs to help us make our tinctures and our teas. So I think that is a really good strategy, is just to try and think in terms of systems. Another strategy that we use, and I think a lot of people do this in life anyways, is just try not to buy everything new. Like just like really reduce your costs. Do you really need all the gadgets? I mean, there are lots of really nice tools available, but maybe just be really miserly with how you spend your money. Sometimes it's so hard to make 20 bucks, you know, and it's so easy to spend it. So you really do need to get like solid on your business management. So I'm just going to do a little shout out again. There is an agribusiness planning workshop coming up. What's the date on that, John? Like in 2 weeks? Yeah. April 15th and 16th. It's a 2-day workshop, agribusiness planning specifically for farmers. And you know, like that never happens. So that's what I would say is if you're going to be small scale, know your market, like Cam says, and cater to what people actually want. But just really be creative too. And I think really good marketing and having solid relationships and looking for those repeat customers is a really good strategy if you want to be small scale.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurie. Any other comments from the panel on that one?
Yeah, as a small-scale producer, we have found at our farm that one of the biggest advantages you have as a small-scale producer is not only can you meet with the consumer face-to-face and tell them about your food, you can tell them about what makes small-scale farming on your farm what it is and what you're doing for the soil. Because at the end of the day, soil security is food security. From a producer's perspective, if we're losing our topsoil every year at the rate of 10 tons a year per person, globally, we've got to take care of our soil. And if we take care of our soil, it will take care of us. So it really becomes an issue of, land use. And when you farm in a certain way and you can meet the customer face to face and shake their hand, and a lot of people who farm can't do that anymore. Large-scale farmers don't do that, and they can't do that. They don't have the outlets. They don't have the. They're quite often contract growers for large corporations, and when you can meet the person and tell them about the way you produce your food, you can. Be rest assured that they know they know what they're getting, and there's a lot of people out there today. There's a huge amount of consumer awareness. People want to know what they're getting with their food. They want to know how it was grown and what the farmer was doing to get that food to the market and onto people's tables. Thanks.
Question for Kevin.
Yep.
Do you think it's possible in Terrace or in the Northwest to be a full-time farmer if you are trying to make every sale a direct sale? If you want to look every customer in the eye, are you going to be able to make enough money to farm full-time?
Well, I can say that yes, you can make a living wage, and yes, you can make it full-time. You need a lot of money to do that at today's land prices. And to hear you talk about making minimum wage for your first few years farming, that's not going to do it. You can't make minimum wage and make it farming. You have to plan to make money, and if you make money farming, you're in business. If you make minimum wage, you're in poverty.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm going to be in poverty for a few years, definitely. So I'm really fortunate to have a rental land situation. But no, it's good to hear you say that you can potentially make enough money doing the direct sales. Because like I said, farmers market's a big one for me for the first few years at least.
So we've had a lot of success on the sales front. We don't produce huge amounts of food because, our focus is on quality. We don't farm to the standard of productivity, which is kind of regarded as the other standard. And we usually go home with no food. We have amazing support in Terrace. There's a repeat customer base that continually makes sure that we're actually out of food by 10:30 in the morning a lot of the times. And it's not to show up for $200 a day or $400 a day or $500 a day. It's to pay a wage. Yeah, that's why we farm.
No, I agree. And just one comment on the profitability thing. The place where I'm renting land at Hidden Acres Farm, they did a little bit of farming in the past. They're mostly just hobby farming now, but then they built cabins as a rental venue, and we're renovating the barn right now as a rental venue for weddings and shows and things. So they've pivoted into tourism and agritourism because the way that they were farming wasn't profitable. So hopefully I can make the farming side profitable and they can make the tourism side profitable on the same property.
Another thing I wanted to mention, like strategies that we've done on our farm, like we've tried a lot of different animals just to decide which animals are going to make the most sense to raise. And we did goats, we did pigs, we did bees, we did ducks. And we did settle on sheep because we wanted to pick an animal that could actually just feed off the land, so we wouldn't be spending a lot of money buying feed from somebody else. And that's been amazing. I mean, we're blessed because we have 50 acres for those animals to feed off of. And yeah, I think it helps to have a lot of connections in the community. And like with Bill being raised here, and I've been here for 20 years doing a lot of community work, I just know a lot of people. So for the first couple years, there is a hayfield, but we didn't have a tractor. Every farmer that doesn't have a tractor understands like the glory of the day when you do, and now it's such a game changer. So when we got our tractor 2 years ago, we set our sights on getting our own hay equipment too, instead of sharecropping. So yeah, now we're actually making our own hay and feeding our own animals, and the animals are out there all summer, like fertilizing their feed for the winter as well, you know. So that's just something that I would really advise anyone to think about. Is like when you're choosing your animals, don't choose it because it's cute or because it was free. Like think about the economics of that animal and how you're going to feed it. That was one of the reasons why we stopped producing chickens, laying hens, because we realized that with our solar system and the short days of the winter, that we can't heat or put light into our hen house, and then they're not producing, and we just end up like we're feeding the chickens instead of the chickens feeding us, and it's costing us money. It's actually cheaper for us to buy eggs from somebody else than to raise our own eggs. So that can be the hardest part, is just to really know your numbers and to take the time to do that. And if it's not your forte, that's fine. But don't just say it's not important because you don't know how to do it. Make sure you have somebody on your team that's going to help you understand like the viability of each of your product streams and what it costs you to make $1. Yeah, if it's costing you $5 to make $1, you're in the wrong business. You got to choose your products that are going to be profitable, not just because they're fun or they're cute or whatever. You have to be really practical.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurie. So we're running a little bit low on time. We did start a couple minutes late, so I'm going to sneak in a couple minutes late so we can have some time for questions. So we're going to open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions, again, please try and speak loudly and try and direct your question to a specific panelist, and then we'll give them time, the rest of the panelists time to discuss it. Does anyone have any questions?
Such a great question. Thank you. Yeah, water is huge. And I guess, you know, depending on what you're growing, some things that maybe didn't need to be irrigated before now have to be irrigated because it's too dry. So yeah, I would recommend a drip irrigation system. That's what we did. There's been a lot of workshops recently on water management, and there's some new regulations too. You know, if you want to just make a pond or if you want to have a well, like you can't, apparently you can't just dig a pond and start using it. You have to register that. So I'm not going to talk about the ponds that you may or may not have on your farm to help you through a drought season. But yeah, I definitely would suggest that people start choosing more drought tolerant crops. And we are going to be talking a bit more about that yesterday, because there was a study just released by UNBC in partnership with the Smithers Farmers Institute and a few other sponsors, looking at crops that will make sense to grow in climate change scenarios that are going to be different from what we've been used to. So things like Hascat berries, even hops was one of the top 10 too. But just things that are more drought resistant. I think perennials in general will have a bit of an easier time, more diversity. Our farm is a really big advocate of the food forest model, which basically is a system of designing your garden so that it models a young woodland with different canopy layers, your tall trees and then your shrubs and then your herbaceous layer, and that makes them more tolerant too. So there's lots of good tricks and strategies for water conservation that I think would help us a lot with our water problem. But I do think that we are going to have some tough times ahead. So I really do think people should get serious about collecting and storing rainwater, for example, and understanding too that soil is really the most efficient place to store your water, but your soil is not going to be able to store water if it doesn't have a good organic matter content. I think Kevin's going to talk about that.
I would love to talk on that topic. Yeah, back to building the soil. Farmers either are doing it or they're not. Very few are probably actually maintaining very steady carbon levels of their soil. And the practice out there in the world of certified organic growers, which is what I represent here in Terrace, is to use a lot of cover crops and green manures, which are grown for the purpose of benefiting the soil by building the carbon levels of the soil and building the nitrogen levels of the soil. And when you add carbon into the soil by growing some of these crops, whether you just mow it at the surface level or you incorporate it somehow into the soil, it greatly affects the water holding capability of the soil. So the amount of water that a farm needs declines quite a lot as the carbon levels go up in the soil, which is only built over time. And we use our own hay from our property. We have goats, and that turns into compost, which ends up in our garden. But we also grow the cover crops. And to refer to Joel Salatin, great author, lots of great ideas from that guy. But he refers to the number of one gram of carbon can hold 8 grams of water. So it basically gives the soil a sponge-like property so that it helps alleviate flooding, flash flooding, and it also helps retain the water so the soil doesn't dry out the next day after a rain. It will stay moist for well into the future. So it really depends on how the soils are managed as to how much water people will need for their crops. And even wind protection for your crops. We're putting up a windbreak this year for our garden because the transpiration that occurs when the wind is blowing across your soil actually accelerates the evaporation of the water as well. So windbreaks can also reduce a farm's water usage a lot.
Oh, Cam, did you want to say anything in there?
Yes.
I see Laurie going.
Soil's great. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that I could be learning here from Kevin. Yeah, very important to have good organic matter content in your soil. I'm very excited to get my soil analysis results back in the next week here, see how I'm doing.
So I just wanted to extend that invitation again. Like we are a permaculture farm and we employ a lot of different permaculture techniques. So if anyone wants to come out and see how we've put in swales where we have slopes to slow water down and to reduce erosion and collect the water. If you want to see our rainwater systems, our gutters and our downspouts and all the big tanks that we have. If you want to see the natural ponds that are all very well situated in the shade and at the bottom of a slope so that they are catching more water. There's a lot of, fairly cheap ideas you can employ through design. So there is going to be a permaculture workshop tomorrow afternoon. And then, yeah, I would, there's so many good resources on water. And I think, John, you probably have maybe some at your table at the back for Ministry of Agriculture. More on soil? Yeah.
Capacity and soil building and stuff. Yeah, not so much on the designs of swales and ponds, but
Okay.
it's all available online. Good resources.
Okay. Great. Okay, so yeah, water, huge topic, and I think that the Food Action Network for sure will be putting up more water resources on our website and posting about that regularly, and maybe too there could be an opportunity for some collective purchasing. You know, we've looked into the big tanks that you can get, and it's really expensive. You know, like if you want to ship something up from Vancouver, I think like the cost of bringing the tank up here, like a 5,000 liter tank, was more than the cost of the tank, you know. So I think it does make sense for small scale farmers to get together and do orders for things like that. Like when we did our drip irrigation order, we ordered extra for other farmer friends that wanted some. So I think that's another good strategy too. You can save a lot of money on shipping by putting in bulk orders.
Awesome.
I'm on the Thornhill water system, so I'm very curious to see how that plays out, see if we have any shortages this year. But just while I have the mic, just a quick plug. I'm going to be down at the Wellness Expo with some microgreens here, so come on down to the trade show.
Awesome. So that is, we've gone a little bit over time, so I just want to say thank you so much. Edward, would you mind? Perfect, thanks. So I just want to say thank you so much to the farmers for taking some time out of their day. I know it's a super busy time of year, so thank you so much to Kevin and Cam for coming to spend the day with us here in Terrace, and thank you to Laurie for all that she does for the Food Forum and for as well sitting on the panel as a producer. So huge round of applause for these guys.